Okay, hello, my name is Joseph, and this talk is about surveying consumer understanding and sentiment of virtual reality. This work was primarily conducted by myself, with some input from my supervisors Mohammed Khamis and Julie Williamson. We all work at the University of Glasgow. So the main goal behind this work was we wanted to begin to understand how non-experts describe, define, and understand virtual reality. Because as I'm sure you're all aware, virtual reality is still an emerging technology. It's not achieved the level of success as, say, smartphones yet, but it is a very popular topic amongst researchers, especially in the HCI community. Now, as part of that, I think it's important to understand, how non-experts view the technology. And work that was done by Thompson and Potter recently, which I've referenced in the paper, looked at, non-expert understanding of augmented reality. And they found that augmented reality, is not at all well understood by, consumers. So I was wondering, what if the same is true for VR, right? How much of my PhD work has been invalid because, people just don't understand the technology that I'm meant to be working with. So I set about trying to be a scholar once more, and I said the first thing to do was to try and figure out, okay, what do people, what do the experts agree is a definition of virtual reality? And I'm about to horribly pronounce this name, but Spiker found that experts generally agreed on a definition of what constitutes VR. 1, a fully virtual view, 2, full immersion, and 3, head-worn technology. So I combined this with some work I'd been reading about on consumer mental models and concept association, and I came up with these two aims, to try and understand, 1, what concepts do non-experts use to define, and what do they associate VR with, and 2, what is the sentiment towards virtual reality more generally. Again, this last one was a bit of a selfish aim. I was trying to figure out, right, is the ship burning already? Are people hating on VR again like they did in the late 90s, early 2000s? So I thought, okay, we can probably do that while we're trying to figure out the concepts as well. So we designed a survey, really short, only 2 questions, which looked at investigating, concepts people associate with VR, and also their sentiment more generally with it. There was only 2 questions, like I said. 1, when you think of virtual reality, what first comes to mind? And 2, which 4 words would you use to describe virtual reality? Both of these are approaches which are commonly used to investigate concept association and sentiment more generally. So we had 210 responses of varying ages and genders. We captured prior experience with VR headsets using a 5-point Likert scale. We'd have a mean of about 3 for that. And for our analysis, we decided that we were going to do 1 on the entire dataset, so all 210 responses. But then we would also split the dataset into an experienced and inexperienced subset, and that we would analyze these to see if there was any influence with prior experience on the answers people were giving. Quickly going over then the subset datasets that we had. We had 1 for the inexperienced users. These were 89 of the original 210. These were people with no or a little experience with VR, tending much more towards those with a little rather than no experience. And then for the experienced dataset, we had 67 responses, where people either had much or a lot of experience with VR. Looking at our first question then, when you think of virtual reality, what first comes to mind? We did a thematic analysis of the responses. We allowed for multiple coding, so VR headsets for games would be coded as applications of VR and hardware. This was the only fair way to do this, given the nature in which people were responding. We found 11 themes within the dataset. And interestingly, experts' 3 defining characteristics of VR were all included within these themes. So the defining characteristic of head-worn technology, that maps quite easily to the hardware theme. And then the 2 defining characteristics of a full view and immersive technology, that's covered by the another world and immersion themes. We saw some other interesting themes as well. So applications of VR was very at the forefront of people's minds. But also things like futurism, which was quite unexpected, You wouldn't really think of technology which, someone can buy in the store or online very easily as being this futuristic sci-fi-like machine. Some other things worth highlighting as well. When we looked at the applications of VR, 95 out of 99 of the responses in this theme featured video games or gaming in some capacity. So it really shows this, vast dominance of gaming and video games as being the application of VR. At least as far as our respondents saw it. Interesting also, prior experience with VR had no real impact on the concepts individuals were associating with VR. Moving on then to the 4 words used to describe virtual reality. The analysis here was a bit more involved. So we did a thematic analysis of every word. Every word was also assigned a sentiment score. So +1 if positive, 0 if neutral, or -1 if negative. It's worth noting that we took immersive to be a positive word because we viewed that as a goal of the technology, and we thought, well, if people are describing it as immersive, then it must be doing something right. And we also worked at the frequency in which words were given so that we could produce an overall sentiment score. There was 840 words in total. 236 of these were unique, 138 were subjective, and 98 were descriptive. The descriptive words were the ones which were taken to be the neutral terms, and the subjective ones either had a positive or a negative sentiment associated with them. These categories had a bunch of themes associated with them. So for the descriptive category, you can see that hardware and applications of VR were the main themes which emerged. For the subjective ones, it was a lot more varied, so you had quite a lot of positive and negative criticism, but you also had things like immersion again reappearing. Some things worth highlighting here then. The reappearance of hardware and immersion themes really doesn't reinforce these as concepts associated with VR by our respondents. Also interesting is this collection of negative response themes. So, negative critique, disappointment, simulation sickness, usage issues, and complexity. I think these are all worth considering because they represent different ways people have been let down by VR technology. Once again, prior experience with VR had no real impact on the themes we saw emerge. Looking at the sentiment scores then, for the sentiment mapping, we had 70 unique positive words, 98 neutral, and 68 negative. The total score for the entire dataset was around about plus 30%. It was composed of about plus 50 and then minus 20. Looking at the sentiment score for the subgroups then, this is actually the only time prior experience had any real meaningful impact on the results. The inexperienced subgroup had a score of roughly about 21%, whereas the experienced subgroup had a score of about 34%. The main difference was the negative responses seen in both subgroups. I think this higher proportion of negative comments in the inexperienced subgroup might be due to people who have tried VR once or twice and been underwhelmed by the experience. I'm sure we've all demoed VR to someone once or twice before and had them turn around and say, "Is that it?" So I could see that being the real difference here. It's worth saying also that as a byproduct of doing the sentiment scoring, we actually obtain a list of the most frequently used terms to describe VR in the dataset. So you can see those here. Again, notice how they are quite similar to the concepts which have been associated throughout, immersion, expensive, video games, futuristic, things like that. So the takeaways I'd like to leave you with at the end of this talk, well, VR was very well understood by all of our respondents. All of VR's defining characteristics, a fully virtual view, immersion, and head-worn technology were referenced throughout by our participants. Also, sentiment towards VR is positive, so there's no need to abandon ship quite yet. Respondents also frequently mentioned the concepts of video games, futurism, and price throughout. These are a bit strange. Futurism in particular is a bit weird. If I look around this room, I can see 4 VR headsets. To me, futurism isn't something that I can go down to the store and buy. It's something that I can only imagine. And price? Sure, VR headsets were expensive 5 years ago and required an even more expensive computer to run. But we've got standalone headsets now, and prices which are lower than ever. 2 of those headsets I bought myself, on a PhD salary. Respondents also had a fixation on VR for gaming. This suggests with consumers that VR's envisioned applications may be pigeonholed entirely as a gaming device. While much research has looked at the many potential applications of VR, with consumers it appears that they only consider it as a source of entertainment. Finally, as always, further work is necessary to fully understand the problem, and future work should continue to investigate and develop our understanding of consumers' mental model of VR. In closing, our contributions are these. We show that sentiment towards VR is positive with consumers. We show that consumers have a good understanding of what VR is, and describe it using the same defining concepts as experts. However, our results also show that the concepts of video games, futurism, and price are strongly associated with VR by consumers. Consumers also appear to have a fixation on VR for gaming as the only envisioned application of the technology, suggesting to some extent it may be pigeonholed as a gaming device.